All right. So in order to really appreciate the value of vaccines, it's helpful to understand what they're preventing, the diseases that led us to the point of using vaccination. One of the most devastating diseases in history is the smallpox virus. Smallpox existed at the time of the ancient Egyptians. We still find evidence of smallpox on mummified remains. And it's incredibly devastating to populations because it has about a 30% fatality rate. It infects and kills 30%. Now, even the people who manage to survive smallpox are scarred for life. Notice these nasty pustules growing on the faces and bodies of these infected individuals. Those infected pustules pop, they scab over, and then you're left with a devastating scar. So smallpox was incredibly dangerous, and it killed by the millions. In the year 1796, a doctor named William Jenner observed that milkmaids, the women who go and milk the cows, usually didn't contract smallpox. However, they did often contract cowpox, which looked a lot like smallpox, a very similar disease, but a lot less severe. You don't usually die from cowpox. So his theory was maybe cowpox is a lesser version of smallpox, and maybe if you catch that, then you become immune to smallpox. So in order to test this theory, he completed probably one of the most unethical experiments in history, but fortunately it was successful. So he took a pustule from an infected milkmaid who had cowpox, and he scraped that infected pustule into the arm of a young boy named James Phipps. Predictably, the young boy became infected with cowpox. So he was sick and he recovered because, again, cowpox, a lot less severe disease. Then Jenner decided, okay, let's see if this kid is susceptible to smallpox. He took the scab of an infected person who had smallpox and scraped it into the boy's arm again. The boy did not become sick from smallpox. He was immune, even after Jenner tried to inoculate him several more times. Again, completely unethical experiment. You could never get away with that today. Fortunately for William Jenner and James Phipps, it worked. So this actually introduced a process called variolation, deliberate infection of yourself with a lesser version of a virus in order to become immune. Variolation became common throughout the United States and Europe. It started out in Boston in the year 1800. So notice the cases of smallpox here in the years preceding 1800, they were going down thanks to a better understanding that smallpox was a transmissible disease and you should stay away from people who have it. However, there were still about 5,000 cases in the year 1779. In the year 1800, they started using variolation, and by the year 1811, there were only 2.7 cases in Boston. Very effective methods. Now, in the year 1959, the World Health Organization decided that it was going to start the smallpox eradication campaign. They were going to vaccinate the world against smallpox. So this is what the infection rate looked like in 1930. The red countries have incredibly high rates of smallpox. Yellow, little less, green, few. The white countries didn't report their statistics for that year. But the important point here is look at all that red. This was the year 1930 when variolation existed, but the vaccine was not widely available around the world. The vaccine, by the way, is different from variolation. We don't infect people with cowpox anymore. We actually have a vaccine with vaccinia virus. It's an attenuated version of smallpox, so it doesn't make you sick, and you don't have to get cowpox. So the World Health Organization started inoculating people around the world with this vaccine. And then in the year 1950, before this campaign began, this is what the infection rate looked like. So the United States had already started vaccinating, and so had many parts of Europe. But the vaccine hadn't reached areas of South America, Asia, and Africa. By the year 1975, only 8 years after the smallpox eradication campaign, this is what the infection rate looked like. Then a miracle happened. In the year 1980, this is the cover of the Lancet Journal. The world was declared smallpox free. Smallpox only exists now in research laboratories, and that's because of vaccination. In addition to that, we also have the polio vaccine. In the 1950s, you ask anyone who grew up in the 1950s, what were they afraid of? Many of them will tell you they were afraid of polio. Polio is a devastating disease because it crippled over 35,000 people per year, causes incredible weakness and paralysis of the lower limbs, like this little girl on crutches who can't support her weight, or these children who can't get up and walk around and play. So the polio vaccine was an incredible innovation, and it was introduced to the United States in 1955, which is why, if you look at this graph of 1988, or this geographic map, the United States doesn't have a lot of cases. However, all of these other countries in red have high infection rates of polio. Again, the World Health Organization decided they were going to start an eradication campaign. They started introducing the vaccine to parts around the world. This is what polio looked like in 2014. Polio still exists. We haven't quite eradicated it like we did smallpox, but it only exists in tiny clusters in these countries where it's difficult to reach small villages, remote access. So we're well on the way to putting polio in the same place as smallpox, existing only in the laboratory. Now, one of the questions that often comes up is, well, why do we really need vaccines? With all of this modern medicine, we should be able to take care of measles in the hospital. We should be able to help someone with whooping cough, give them some NyQuil. Not quite. One of the most important things you have to remember about vaccine-preventable diseases is they have no cure. We don't have the technology to be able to cure them or treat them, so that's why we vaccinate. Another thing that people seem to misconceive about vaccine-preventable diseases is their severity. Measles is thought of as just a fever and a rash. Get some hydrocortisone and take some Tylenol and you'll be okay. Well, Sofina was talking to you earlier about some of the very rare side effects of vaccines. The side effects of diphtheria are not so rare. Diphtheria has a 10% mortality rate. Even with all of our great modern medicine, there's a 10% chance diphtheria will kill you. This is an image of a nasty pustule at the back of a person's throat. That's a characteristic way to diagnose diphtheria. Looks kind of painful, doesn't it? Other side effects you can get from diphtheria include heart damage, nerve damage, paralysis, pneumonia. What about tetanus? Notice how we're going through the DTP vaccine here? Bet you can guess what's next. Tetanus. Tetanus is a fun one. 10 to 20% death rate, even with modern medicine. Tetanus causes muscle spasms so severe that your muscles seize up and roughly contract. And this is the characteristic pose. This is a painting from the 1800s of a man who has tetanus. He's arching his back in this painful way because all of his muscles are pulled so tight, and the muscles in your back are stronger than the muscles in your abdomen. So you get arched backwards in this painful display, and it can cause fractures of your bones. In addition to those fractures, you can also get pneumonia or heart attack from tetanus. Not so fun. Pertussis, or whooping cough, is often overlooked for its severity. Pertussis causes coughing so severe it fractures babies' ribs. It causes seizures, pneumonia, and even in adults it can cause urinary incontinence, brain swelling, and death. We've been incredibly effective using pertussis vaccination in reducing the amount of whooping cough around the world. So in the 1940s, before the pertussis vaccine was available, pertussis infected over 200,000 people per year. With the introduction of the vaccine, we've seen about an 80% decrease in the number of cases. Now, I know it's hard to read this graph, but this is actually showing you over the years. The bar graph is the number of cases of whooping cough around the world, so these are world cases. The red and the blue lines indicate the number of vaccinations. Notice the correlation. As vaccinations go up, pertussis cases go down. So we're decreasing the number of pertussis cases around the world, but we're not there like we are with polio and smallpox. Getting there. What about the other devastating diseases that we vaccinate against? What are the side effects of those? Well, I talked about measles. Measles, in addition to giving you a rash and fever, can cause ear infections that result in deafness, cause encephalitis, brain swelling, that results in death or permanent brain damage, diarrhea, pneumonia. How about mumps? Mumps is often thought of as a very simple disease, just some swelling of your cheeks, right? Well, that swelling doesn't just happen in your cheeks, it can also happen in the testes and ovaries, resulting in sterility, and for the guys, lots of pain. Pancreatitis, that's pretty painful too, and permanent deafness in about 4% of cases. Rubella is a nasty one. If a pregnant woman comes down with rubella, it can cause miscarriage, or it can devastate her baby with serious birth defects of the heart, lungs, and brain. If adults come down with rubella, it can cause brain infections, or they can experience arthritis or bleeding problems. All of these diseases are preventable by vaccination. All of these effects are preventable, but only if you vaccinate. Measles has decreased dramatically in the United States with the help of vaccination. We used to have about 3 to 4 million infections per year, about 50,000 hospitalizations and 6,000 deaths in the United States. With the introduction of the vaccine, notice the number of cases were incredibly high. Vaccine, 1 year later, it spikes up, goes dramatically down. Measles was declared eradicated from the United States in 2000. Go America! We've also spread the vaccine around the world.
Can I just interrupt? Today's New York Times, big article on how it's reemerging in, I think, 3 places.
We're getting to that. Yep. So these are the world cases of measles. Again, the bar graph shows how many people are infected, and the line graph shows the number of vaccinations. Vaccinations go up, measles cases go down. So what happened? That's what I'd like to know. Cases of measles, cases of mumps, cases of rubella, pertussis, diphtheria in the United States, in Europe, Japan, Australia, all these countries that have vaccinations so readily available. And we're seeing these dramatic cases of emerging measles, of mumps, of rubella. We had a case of measles here in Colorado, in Stapleton. So why the decrease in vaccination? What's the effect? Well, here's an example for you. These little babies have little dots on them. Each little dot represents a case of measles, and each year. So a lot of cases in 2001, 2002, but not dramatic. 2014, lots of cases of measles. These were vaccinated individuals. Something you have to realize about all vaccines is they're not 100% effective. We have mechanisms in our bodies that sometimes prevent us from making antibodies to certain diseases. And so just because you have a vaccine, that doesn't mean you're 100% immune. You can still catch it. It's a rarity, but it does happen. And that's what these cases represent. Now let's see what happens when we look at unvaccinated individuals who caught measles during this year. Ooh, yeah, that's a lot worse. This poor baby in 2014 can't catch a break. Unvaccinated cases, vaccinated cases. Vaccinated cases, unvaccinated cases. See the difference? Why are there objections to vaccines? Why do people hesitate to get them? Safina touched on this, and I'm just going to touch on a little bit more. Back when vaccines first became an option, this is a drawing from the 1800s of what vaccination looked like. So this is a nasty wound that you get from having cowpox inoculated in your arm. Looks pretty gross, right? And kind of dangerous, because that can become infected with other things and make you incredibly sick and kill you. So that's a reasonable objection to variolation. It could get you sick and kill you all by itself. Forget smallpox, that thing could kill you. Even when the vaccine was introduced, it still caused a nasty welt on the arm, fairly unpleasant. So there's always been a concern about the safety of vaccines. And back then, might be a bit more of a concern compared to now, because now we have a lot more mechanisms for safety in place. However, even in modern times, mothers are still afraid of vaccines. You can see this mother holding her baby away from the shot because what she sees in that shot is not a protective vaccine, but this little drop of what she perceives as a toxin. There's a lot of misinformation about vaccines that they contain dangerous toxins, whereas what they actually contain are preventative medicines. What this mother doesn't see is that while she's pulling her baby away from this vaccine, she's holding him out and exposing him to all the toxins of the world that he can get from these vaccine-preventable diseases. Another common objection to vaccines is the idea that it's just unnatural. Originally, cowpox was the cure for smallpox. It came from cows. How unnatural is that? Putting something from cows into people. So that seemed kind of weird. Now, the objection tends to be more based on the idea that it's a kind of fate or determinism. Maybe you're supposed to get pertussis and become naturally immune. Well, that works for the people who survive. But if you die of the pertussis or you suffer some of those awful side effects we talked about, like fractured ribs, not really worth it. Other objections to vaccines are often based on doubt of how effective they are. So when the smallpox vaccine was introduced, everyone wasn't really convinced that smallpox was a transmissible disease. They thought smallpox actually rained down from the sky and you caught it that way. So why would you go and infect yourself with cowpox to prevent that? Now, in the modern age, where we understand a lot more about transmission of disease, the doubt of effectiveness comes more from too much information. In order to understand vaccines, you need rudimentary understanding of chemistry, of antibodies in the immune system, of pathogens, bacteria, fungus, viruses. You need to understand all these different immune cells. You need to understand all these different scientific concepts, how to understand statistics and graphs. It's overwhelming. One person can't possibly grasp the full complexity of a vaccine unless they spend a lot of time doing it. And not everybody has the time to get that firm grasp of all these different scientific concepts. So what do you do in that case? Well, you put your trust in someone who does have the time. Find a scientist who you trust and say, hey, I'm really concerned about this formaldehyde in vaccines. Can you tell me more about that? Take a scientist who you trust, ask them, or talk to your doctor and say, what about these aluminum salts? Are those going to harm my child? Are they going to harm me? Talk to them, because that's their job, is to understand that stuff. And you can do your own research, and it's good to get a little bit of guidance from someone who's been there, who understands it, because sometimes it is easy to misinterpret information too. So again, asking for help from a professional is a great idea, but of course it does have to be someone you trust. Otherwise, how are you ever going to value that information? The last issue that tends to be an objection to vaccination is the issue of personal liberty. There's a lot of call for mandating vaccines now because parents feel that their children are being compromised in their safety in schools. The objection started in the 1800s with the United Kingdom. Britain mandated vaccination of smallpox. And parents were terrified because, again, you saw that nasty wound on the arm that came from the cowpox. Parents were afraid that the vaccine was going to kill their children. So here you have a mother trying to hold her child and protect him while the constable is ordering her to vaccinate her child, and here's a skeleton waiting to take her child into death. That was how it was perceived, that there were orders to kill their children in order to protect them. Nowadays, it tends to be more the my child, my choice argument. This is the United States. We value personal freedom and the ability to make a choice and to make choices for your own children. The problem is it doesn't just become your choice when you're talking about people who have immunocompromised children. An immunocompromised child who goes to school doesn't have a choice. His parents don't have a choice. And so he's in jeopardy if someone comes to school with measles. And the only way he can be protected is if someone else who comes to school is vaccinated, because they can be vaccinated. So that's where the personal liberty becomes a bit of an issue. And I'll be honest, I am very pro-vaccine. I think vaccines are a great idea and everyone should get them who can. But even I hesitate to say, take away everybody's choice, because I do believe in personal freedom. It's important. So what I think is more important is education and helping people to understand the value of vaccines, to understand that this is the best choice for your child. Now, we did a little demonstration earlier, and I'm going to go ahead and give you another demonstration about the importance of vaccines. So you have your little popsicle sticks. Please take a look at those. If they have a black dot, please stand up. One vaccine that people often hesitate to get is the flu vaccine. During World War I, the Spanish flu infected 500 million people, 1/3 of the world's population. 1/3 of our room caught the Spanish flu. Now, if you got your flu vaccine this year, you can sit down. If you're still standing, I'm sorry, you died of the Spanish flu. That can happen any year, right? So the flu virus is a lot more dangerous than is often perceived. World War I killed approximately 50 million people. The Spanish flu killed anywhere from 50 to 100 million people. More people died of the flu in the years 1917 to 1919 than World War I. The reason for that is the Spanish flu is a very unique strain of the flu virus. So this is a mortality curve. What you see on the bottom, this dotted line, shows the number of deaths, and then on the bottom are your age groups. So people who are very young often have a high mortality rate from flu, and that's because children don't have highly developed immune systems. They're very vulnerable to disease. The same goes for the elderly. As you age, your immune system starts to wear down, and so you're more vulnerable to the flu. Now, the Spanish flu showed that same trend, but there was also this weird peak in the middle where individuals ages 25 to 34 died at a very high rate. Young, healthy people with strong developed immune systems were dying from the flu. No explanation why, other than it's a unique strain. And we get unique strains every single year. You never know when that virus is going to turn into one of these mortality curves instead of one of these. Does anyone know what strain of virus the flu virus was when it was the Spanish flu? It was H1N1. We had H1N1 reemerge around the world about 10 years ago. We vaccinated for it, thankfully, and we didn't get another epidemic where we lost 1/3 of the world's population. That's the value of vaccines. The Spanish flu was so devastating that life expectancy in the United States decreased by 12 years from that one epidemic. So when you think about vaccines and vaccine refusal, you have to remember who is left vulnerable. When you don't vaccinate, you're leaving the elderly vulnerable, infants who can't be vaccinated yet, people who are immunocompromised, whose immune systems can't fight off a disease even if they have the vaccine, and you're vulnerable. So vaccines are important, and they help us. They've helped us to eliminate diseases that devastated humanity for thousands of years, and they continue to do so. So let's continue to use them.